Hi everyone, this is Carly Hasselfeld for our week 5 reading assignment where I read an excerpt, or chapter 2, from the book On Theoretical Sociology, 5 Essays, Old and New, written by Robert K. Merton. Chapter 2 is entitled On Sociological Theories of the Middle Range. Before we get started, I just wanted to note that since I am not a sociologist, I took this assignment a little bit differently by breaking down what is middle range theory, how did sociologists react to it, did they agree with it, did they argue it, how do I feel about it after reading all this information, and this was just to serve as a way for me to better understand the topic and hopefully for you as well. So, what is middle range theory and why should we, or you as a sociologist, support it? A middle range theory is a theory that lies between the minor but necessary working hypotheses that evolve in abundance during day-to-day research, and the all-inclusive systemized effort to develop a unified theory that will explain all the observed uniformities of social behavior, social organization, and social change. From my understanding, middle range theory was created to essentially take away the large abstract concepts of grand theory and focus it into something that can be tested and validated. To quote, I believe, and beliefs are of course notoriously subject to error, that theories of the middle range hold the largest promise, provided that the search for them is coupled with a pervasive concern with consolidating special theories into more general sets of concepts and mutually consistent propositions. Even so, we must adapt the provisional outlook of our big brother and of Tennyson. Our little systems have their day, they have their day and cease to be. I believe that Merton attributes theories of the middle range to hold the largest promise because the essential point is that these are empirically grounded theories involving sets of confirmed hypotheses and not merely organized descriptive data or empirical generalizations or hypotheses which remain logically disparate and unconnected. What makes the middle range theory successful at not creating those empirical generalizations or hypotheses is that it has constraints. So, what are some of those constraints? I think I wrote these out of order because I think it's more important to note that it limits the assumptions and hypotheses which can be tested, and therefore it limits the data that it interprets. It essentially fills in the sociological blanks created by grand theory. To quote, sociological theory, if it is to advance significantly, must proceed on these interconnected planes. 1. By developing special theories from which to derive hypotheses that can be empirically investigated, and 2. By evolving, not suddenly revealing a progressively more general conceptual scheme that is adequate to consolidate groups of special theories. Something that I think is important to note here, though, is that the concept of middle range theory is not new. In fact, it has been around for at least 200 plus years in the field of sociology. But Merton, to quote, I suspect, although have not done the spadework needed to investigate the questions, that the widespread resonance of middle range theory in the last decade results in part from the emergence of large numbers of sociological investigators carrying out research that is both empirically based and theoretically relevant. Since middle range theory has been around for a while, I wanted to look into how did sociologists react to this new school of thought, or old school thought in this case. The responses were largely governed by the sociologists' own patterns of work. Some sociologists who were committed to develop a total sociological theory here and now described the policy, or middle range theory, as a retreat from the properly high aspirations. However, in the group of sociologists who were committed to developing that grand theory of sociology, did recognize that middle range theory is the development of a more comprehensive theory as coming about through a consolidation of middle range theories rather than us emerging all at once from a work of an individual theorist on the ground scale. I thought it was funny, though, how Merton basically rebutted these criticisms of the middle range theory by explaining why criticisms in the scientific field or controversies around this idea can't be taken seriously in the first place. To quote, "Like most controversies in science, this dispute over the allocation of intellectual resources among different kinds of sociological work involved social conflict and not merely intellectual criticism." To expand on this topic a little further, because I thought it was pretty interesting, I want to talk about why and how did Merton react to those criticisms of the middle range theory. For starters, he takes a stance that sociologists can no longer keep up with what is being published in the field, therefore, their reading becomes selective and narrow and creates the polarization of opinion and outlook. He also notes that scientific conflict takes place in the company of equals and often in the presence of peers, so inevitably it becomes a competition for status. And he notes, with conditions such as those, there is little room or chance for a third-party input to turn the conversation away from a status competition and into an intellectual one. To quote, "This controversy follows the classically identified course of social conflict. Attack is followed by counterattack, with progressive alienation between the parties to the conflict. In due course, since the conflict is public, it becomes a status battle more than a search for truth." From my understanding, some sociologists will always reject the middle theory because they have dedicated their careers in the pursuit of an all-encompassing general theory, aka grand theory. Some of this rejection comes from the fact that they think that the middle range theory splits the field of sociology into the unrelated special theories. However, Merton argues this point that is just undeniably not true, and that middle range theory is actually the work of consolidating all of these theories and hypotheses into a more digestible, attainable goal of reaching that grand theory that people are striving for. But because there still is a commitment to a total sociological theory, and due to the fear of this theory being threatened, the sociologists will adamantly reject the notion of middle range theory. To quote a disgruntled sociologist who happens to have committed their career to the total sociological theory or the grand theory, "But what an anemic ambitious this is! Shall we strive for half a victory? Where are the visions that entice us into the world of learning in the first place? I had always thought that sociologists too knew how to dream, and that they believed with Browning that a man's reach should exceed his grasp." Essentially, Merton makes the assumption that some sociologists will never agree with the middle range theory, largely because they are too narrow-minded and have chosen not to do research into the middle range theory and its validity out of fear of becoming obsolete and irrelevant to the field of sociology. Overall, this chapter in Merton's book was pretty interesting, and I feel like I have a better understanding of middle range theory and how it will actually help evolve eventually someday into a grander theory. But just like other scientific processes, it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of work, and a lot of people to get there. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation on the middle range theory, and I look forward to talking with all of you on Monday a little bit more in depth about this topic.